Good evening. Good to see everyone here this evening. Let's start with singing number 18 in the Zion's Praises. Number 18. I live. So let's sing number 680. Number 680. Some people say there is
to all, and welcome with a hearty welcome here tonight. Thank you each one for coming out and supporting Brother Tim and Brother Ken tonight. We have a well-attended audience here. If you thought tonight that you had only hours to live, what would your testimony be? And let's just take a moment and think about that. If you had some terminal illness or there was something known in your mind and heart, some of our families here in our congregation have experienced this recently. But if you knew that you just had hours to live, what would your testimony be tonight? It was 3 years ago, to the month actually, the month of July, that our extended family was away for a couple of days. And when we got back in service, we were out of service, and we got back in service, there was a few voicemails on my phone, and two of those voicemails was, as I listened to them, it was Tim Willis's voice. And 3 years ago, if many of you can remember, we were right in the middle of COVID, and Tim was as well. Tim was in the hospital, and he was battling COVID, and in his mind, as he was leaving me these messages, in his mind, he felt like he had hours to live. He didn't think he was going to make it. And so I listened to those voicemails numerous times, multiple times, as I listened to the heart of Tim share. And so I told him after that experience that I would encourage him to share his experience with us as a congregation sometime. And we thought it was going to happen maybe in our devotional, somewhere along the lines in the last 3 years, but it seems like those opportunities have been limited. And so a couple of months ago, I asked if he would share it on this night, July 2nd, knowing that I was responsible for this service this evening. And so he had agreed to doing that. And coincidentally, last month, Clinton had asked Andy Brocker to share his life story. We hadn't planned that together at all. And so I know numerous of you have asked now, are we going to do what we did like 11 and 12 years ago, where we went through our congregation and each brother shared their life story? We have not discussed that at all. I don't know that that's in the plans, but I almost hear some of you may be asking us to do that again. So I guess that's something for us to discuss. That's not really the intent, even though we are doing this back-to-back months here. And then also I asked Brother Ken if he would share his life story. So tonight, Brother Tim's going to share his COVID testimony, not his life story, but his COVID testimony experience. And then Brother Ken's going to share his life story. I'd like to just open with a couple of verses here before we let them share, and that's Psalm 107. Psalm 107, verses 1, 2. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. For his mercy endureth forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he hath redeemed from the hand of the enemy, and gathered them out of the lands from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south. They wandered in the wilderness in a solitary way. They found no city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted in them. And then they cried unto the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them out of their distresses. And he led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city of habitation. Oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness and for his wonderful works to the children of men. And you continue to read down through this psalm, and you see how he's delivered his people. And then in verses 15 and verses 21 and verse 31, you see again that he says, oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness and for his wonderful works to the children of men. And tonight we give two brothers the opportunity to share their testimony of the goodness and the wonderful works that God has given to them and bestowed upon them. And I believe that we will be benefited tonight as we listen, and we just wish God to bless you, Tim and Ken, as you share with us from your hearts tonight. Before we do that, let's just stand together for prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for this opportunity to hear what you have been doing in the lives of two of our brothers here at Row. We thank you for Tim and his family. We thank you for Ken and his family. And Lord, we just pray that you would use these brothers tonight to speak to our hearts, to warn our hearts, and to encourage our hearts, and even to challenge our hearts, Lord, to a right relationship with you. We thank you for life and breath tonight. We thank you for the gift of good health. We thank you, Lord, that the sun is shining and it seems like all is well, at least to a point. And we just thank you for your goodness to us in so many ways tonight. We pray, Lord, that tonight would just be a means of encouraging our hearts towards you and just a calling us to a preparation of meeting you for forever throughout eternity. Tonight we think of loved ones throughout our congregation who are not here, who even just a year ago, and even some as we've shared these testimonies a decade plus ago who have left us. We know, Lord, that one day you will call our names. And so tonight I just pray that it would be another voice of yours your voice from heaven tonight, calling us to draw near to you while the day of grace is upon us. So we just pray your blessing on Tim and Ken now as they come. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. And you may be seated. All right, so first of all, Brother Tim's going to come share, and then following that, Brother Ken will. God bless you.
All right, good evening, each one. Thanks for each one of you coming out. As Mark mentioned, I'm going to give this COVID story a shot, and then I'll do my life story at another date, Lord willing. So, all right, so with Mark's introduction, he gave thanks for that. It was like 3 years ago. Of course, and we know COVID started in 2020 in March. Some people probably got it before that and didn't know it. But anyway, it became public in March. But I was battling Lyme and co-infections also at that time. Well, not as much then, but I was a few years earlier, more then than now. But I had started taking another Lyme medicine that I had, and maybe to help my immune system, maybe because I was feeling something, I'm not sure. But anyway, I did. Maybe about a week or two. This was June, the end of June, or middle of June. But anyway, it was when I first got any symptoms at all was June 24th. It was actually I kind of just got a feeling that, you have to lay down, It was just like, and I was hoping it was that Lyme medicine I had taken. Of course, back in the mind, COVID's going on. But so it was the night we were helping to set up for Nate's wedding, but in the reception area. So I took ibuprofen, felt okay for a while. Then, till the night was over, I was not feeling so well, so I went into the vehicle ahead of time. So that Wednesday, it started, and Wednesday through Saturday, ibuprofen worked, Wednesday through Friday, because Nate and Amisha got married that Friday. So I was able to be like the master of ceremony yet, so thankfully it didn't affect me yet then as much. Between Wednesday and Friday, ibuprofen worked, but I had constant fevers off and on, and that was the start of the fevers. So then Saturday I got a sore throat, and of course that was one of the symptoms of COVID, as we all knew: taste and smell, sore throat, all that stuff. And then so I decided, okay, I better go get tested. So I went to the Chamberlain Hospital to get tested, and through the emergency room, they said it was going to take a few days, but so if anybody had that test done, it's not fun. Jammed up your nose pretty far, but so yeah, it was. So I gotten that done, and then Monday probably came along, and that's when I started to develop a cough, and probably Monday I just started to develop a cough, and then it gradually got worse. And then Christine, my sister-in-law, found out about I was not doing well, so she brought some essential oils over with her infuser, whatever them things are called. So, yes, because I was willing to try anything at that time. So yeah, this was Monday or Tuesday she came. And then I breathed a lot of that for like 3 days, but the cough was gradually getting worse. I remember thinking, taking a deep breath was not happening. And the cough, between my coughing and breathing, was coming too close together. When I had normal breathe, or even a little above normal breathing, it would cough. So it was it was not fun amongst fevers and coughing, and my oxygen stayed okay, decent. It was in the low 90s. That actually didn't go very bad through this whole ordeal, but it felt like it was good. But and of course, sleeping wasn't very good at all. And then, so during that week, I'd called up wanting to know the results of this COVID test. It was supposed to take a couple of days or so. I didn't have a rapid one. They weren't open that day. So then I called like 3 days that week, and none of those, I mean, I got it done Saturday. I probably called Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they had no results of it. And I distinctly remember telling them one of the times, like, I'm going to be dead before I even find out what I have, if I have COVID or not, which probably in the back of my mind I knew it. But, so yeah, we were doing the essential oils. We were doing, and then my fevers was like 101. It was, and that as a week went on, the ibuprofen worked less and less. It was working less each time. So cold bath, that didn't work. So basically like I say, the symptoms started Wednesday, the night of that. We were going to help set up. And then by the next Saturday, it was about as bad as I could take it. So I woke up, this was a week and a half later, like fevers and everything wouldn't just stop. So I woke up Rachel and I like, we're going to the hospital. I've had enough of it, or I can't take any more of this, because couldn't sleep very good, and it was just nasty. So I went. It was like maybe 4 in the morning. We went Saturday morning, and my temperature was 99 when I got there. Of course, the breathing wasn't good. So they eventually, I ended up talking to 2 emergency room doctors. And well, before that, I had seen a Facebook story. I mean, I did a little research on, what you could do about COVID, but at this point, I had no positive result yet. But I'd read a story on Facebook that someone at the Chambersburg Hospital who was on a ventilator, and now this was just 3 months after COVID started. So there was a lot of people on ventilators dying. There wasn't a whole lot of treatments at this point. But I had read this story that someone had gotten plasma, and he was on the ventilator and then gradually got better, and he went off the ventilator and stuff. And so I talked to 2 different emergency room doctors, and they basically gave me no hope of plasma. They didn't even do it there. So there was even remdesivir out there, and I'm glad they didn't give it to me, because I didn't realize it was that bad for you at the time. But so my fever was 99, and I was there about an hour and a half, and I told them to check it again because I was feeling worse. And my fever went up to 102 at that point. And the second doctor literally was like, "Do you want to go home or stay here? Because we can't really do nothing for you." I was like, "Well, I'm not going home." So they basically just said you can treat the symptoms. And so, yeah, but I knew they had done plasma. I read that story, but they weren't giving me any hope. So they admitted me, and this would have been, Saturday. So since them test results didn't come back from COVID yet, they gave me another test. It was a rapid test, so I got that jammed up my nose again. So they admitted me into a regular room because I technically wasn't a COVID patient yet. So in the middle, I think it was in the middle of Saturday night, they came in. They had gotten both tests back at that point. So the one took a whole week, and then the other one just took a few hours because it was a rapid test. So they were both positive, obviously. So they moved me from a regular room, and then they sent me to the old Chamberlain Hospital room where they were just putting COVID patients, kind of like, it was a dungeon room. It was the old rooms. It wasn't even ones they used anymore. It's basically what they were using for COVID patients. So I went there, and there was no shower. There was nothing there. And they wouldn't let me go to another place to take a shower. You had to stay there unless you had an appointment to go get CAT scans done or something. So this would have been Saturday night. And then they put me on IVs just in case there was bacterial infection somewhere. Oh yeah, they took X-rays when I was in the emergency room, and I couldn't do a deep breath very good, but they obviously told me I had double lung pneumonia. And he could tell by the pictures that it was COVID because of the way the pictures looked. There was a different look with COVID pneumonia. So this was Saturday night, and basically the doctors that came in, the doctor that makes his round, he wasn't giving me any plan of action for nothing. They did blood work. I mean, they didn't give me steroids. They didn't give me nothing. At this point, see, my vitals were fine. So even though I couldn't breathe very good or nothing, they didn't really give me a whole lot of hope of any. Then this fella was there a couple days, and then by probably Monday. Well, I went in here Saturday. Yeah, Sunday and Monday, I got this awful smell, this toxic smell developed, and I didn't have it before I went in this room. So now I have, double lung pneumonia and a toxic smell that it affected my breathing even more. To give you an example, this smell came and went, but there was one time I actually felt good. I didn't have that many times, but my oxygen was 97, and I could feel this smell coming on, and I'll tell you how later. But when this smell came on, my oxygen went down to 90. So that was as low as I know that it went. But so even the toxic smell disrupted my oxygen enough, but my breathing a lot, because it just felt like I was suffocating. And then they tried to give me oxygen, I tried, but then the oxygen just made the smell even worse because it escalated it. I was the only one obviously who could smell this. When this smell, it lasted for 3 or 4 days, but there was times when I could literally see the swirly of smoke, this steam or smoke, whatever, it was swirls. Then I would get a breeze, and then a breeze would hit my face, and then I would get that smell. So I could tell when it was coming. And when I would get out of bed, it would come. Of course, you couldn't breathe very good anyway, so I stayed in bed as much as I could. And then nurses didn't help me basically do anything. So you had to just hyperventilate, take care of yourself or whatever. So, but yeah, this smell, it got so bad, I got out of bed, and I didn't like getting out of bed, but I checked the vents to make sure, there's something coming through the vents or what. And at first I thought I would breathe in so many essential oils that, this was causing it, but it wasn't that. So yeah, it was rough, but yeah, and like I say, this happened when I went into this room. So it was weird. And then that happened a number of times. But then probably because it was hard to sleep. I didn't feel like eating or nothing. So early Tuesday morning, this smell must have been, I don't know, it would hang. At first it would hang on. I mean, it would only last 15 minutes and then leave. But there was times that this was a day, I think it must have lasted about all day, because and that's the early Tuesday morning is when I thought this is the end of me. This was basically yeah, my time was up. And so you start, like Mark was saying, you start reflecting on your life. It's because, and the nurses did not take me seriously because they went by vitals. They didn't exactly know how I felt, but I don't know what my oxygen was. And they didn't come in. They ignored my calls until they didn't come in. This was about 2 to 3. So I was starting to call people if I didn't get a hold of. Like Mark said, he was out of service range. So I left messages or called people, family. I talked to my mom, Sharita. She answered the phone. It was like 10 to 3. I left messages for other family members, but that was the lowest point when I was here, and I thought, that was a number of hours that went by. So I talked, like I said, I talked to Rachel, and I talked to my mom, and when I was on the phone with Mom, we prayed, and then apparently in the early morning, it must have gave way some, because I felt better when like this is probably like 6 or 7, so as much as it was very bad. That was probably the worst because the smell just didn't leave. And so the nurse finally came in, and I was feeling better at times, so she was like, well, she was kind of like making fun, like, why you look so good now or whatever. Well, I told him that I prayed with Mom on the phone, and she didn't say anything. But yeah, she was, but none of them came in at all in those 2 hours whenever I started calling for the nurses. So that was Tuesday. Then I'd gotten, so like I say, that was the worst night, the worst day. In the meanwhile, I got a new doctor in there, the doctors that make their rounds. So I would consider, if you want to say you have a guardian angel, I think this was the guy. He ended up, they were wearing masks, you couldn't really see their face or nothing, but he ended up being my old family doctor from years ago. And I recognized his voice when I knew. But so and at this point there was no plans of nothing. I was just still getting IVs. So he came in and he had a plan. I don't know if I mentioned plasma to him. I don't remember, but he put a band on me on my wrist on Wednesday, saying this is for you in case you get plasma. But plasma wasn't there. It was at York, so I couldn't get it till Thursday. So, but yeah, there was at least a plan in action, and it took them up until basically Wednesday to get one. So basically, from Wednesday was basically just a smell, just the same thing pretty much, or Tuesday. And Wednesday was probably the same. And then Wednesday night, I'm not sure how long we talked, but Mark called me at maybe, I'm just going to guess 9 o'clock. We might have talked an hour. And and I should also say, Rachel was in there every night. They allowed her in there. Right before that, they wouldn't allow her in, but at that point they were allowing her in. And soon after I got out, they changed the rules. So thankfully, and then every night she was there. She would say a prayer before she left. So she was there all the time. So I was talking to Mark. We were talking for a while, and it was around 10 o'clock. We were done talking, and Mark said a prayer for me before we hung up. And at the same time, Rachel was saying a prayer, and they didn't know each one was saying a prayer at that time. But it was around 10 o'clock, and that night I actually slept the best. That was the best night I slept. And then my mom texted me maybe the next morning. She says, I got a story to tell you. because I didn't know what it was. But so she ended up. I probably called her that this would have been. Now Wednesday. This was Wednesday, and the next day I was getting plasma on Thursday. So on Wednesday, this is what. Got to find. I could do it from. Oh, there we go. Yeah, this was her story that happened to her on Wednesday. Okay, and I'm just going to read this. She said that night before, about 10 o'clock, and all of a sudden, as if something was strangling her breathing tubes, let me start over. She said that the night before, about 10 o'clock, and all of a sudden, it was as if something was strangling her breathing tubes. She absolutely couldn't take a deep breath and felt as if she too was dying. She knew at once that this is what I was experiencing. And she heard Satan even say, "This is what Tim feels like." He said it twice. "This is what Tim feels like." She couldn't breathe and she felt like she was dying. So as soon as the feeling left, it felt like a long time, it was about 2 or 3 minutes. But felt much longer. The Lord then spoke to her and said something like, "This is what Tim experiences. It is a spiritual battle, and Satan is trying to kill him just like he just tried to kill you." So, when you hear that kind of a story, it's like, so at the same time, at 10 o'clock, when I had 2 people praying for me, this happened to Mom. So this was clearly a spiritual battle, obviously. And I think that smell that I was talking about describing, I think that was all part of it. And because my oxygen didn't go that low, but it was a suffocating smell, and COVID is a demonic plague disease. And so then she told me how. Then after this, she ran next door to Tom and Sarah's. Tom is my brother and Sarah's my sister-in-law. And found them on the front porch. She explained what just had happened to them and told them that they had to pray for Tim right then or he would die. So Sarah prayed and they all bound and rebuked the devil in Jesus' name. They all commanded him to quit messing with my life, and she said it was a powerful time of prayer. So, like I said, the next day I was getting plasma. So this was when the spiritual battle broke, when Satan was defeated. Whenever Rachel and Mark was praying for me, and our mom was being strangled by Satan, you might say, and then God delivered her, and then because Satan knew the next day I was getting plasma, and he was just trying his best to not let that happen. So Thursday come, and then I was giving 2 units of plasma. It was only 1, but then they changed their thing to 2 units. So you actually got more. Plasma was taken by people who survived COVID, because my family doctor realized that I wasn't getting better, my body wasn't figuring it out. So plasma is taken from people who survived COVID, who has the antibodies to overcome COVID. So it's kind of like the doctor said. I remember him saying it's kind of like your body's fighting a war but needs reinforcements to help it. So when I got that Thursday was the day that started the improvement, actually. And I don't remember the smell, obviously. I don't remember, but until I got out of the hospital, the smell was gone. I had to get out of that room. And so Thursday, and so I got it Thursday, and then Friday, I had another bad spell. I had to clean myself or whatever, give yourself a bath as good as you could. And then I had another bad spell of breathing that night, but this was Friday night. So I really didn't want to go home because I'm like, oh my word. So I think Satan was just trying to do his best to keep me in that room. So basically, I still went home Saturday. So July the 4th through the 11th, I was in there. And as soon as I left that room, I could literally breathe better. I remember sitting in the wheelchair, and I was like, wow, I can actually, breathe better. So that, whatever was demonic room, whatever was going on in there, those bands got broke Wednesday night. And we want to definitely thank the Lord for that. And now so I was good for 3 months. And 3 months later, I had another attack on my breathing. It lasted for months. And without going into much detail, basically I had to tell myself to breathe or I would stop breathing. That's what I thought. It was quite frightening also, and I had trouble even going to sleep at times, at least in that first week. So then I remember, I was a caregiver at the time, and I remember this was 3 months later, like I say, or so, and I wasn't feeling good. So that fellow I was taking care of was taking a nap. So in his living room, there was a window that you could see out. He had a tall wall, and there was a window you could see into the clouds. And so I was just gonna pray for assurance, for something that, it was gonna be okay or whatever. So there was a patch of clouds up there, and within seconds I could see it. The clouds formed into a small baby like you would see in a womb, and it was like an ultrasound. You could literally, it was clearly as plain as day. I could see it. So that gave me the assurance that I was a child of God and everything was going to be okay. I was going to be taken care of. And then within seconds, it was gone. It was back. It left. So I thought that was pretty neat too. A neat promise. So basically, yeah, I had a lot of people praying for me through this, and yeah, when you think you're gonna die, it really gives you a different perspective on things, and it's not a fun experience, but it's a awakening experience. I don't know what you want to say, but there was a lot of people praying for me at that time, and I want to thank each one. I'm sure most of you probably remember this story, but yeah, I wanted to personally thank each one for their prayers, and whether you are struggling with health, finances, relationships, or just any problem, no matter how big it is, I hope this testimony encourages you to trust God to help you. And as strong as Satan is, greater is he that is in you that is in the world. 1 John 4:4. So, there was another verse I wanted to read here. Psalm 91, verses 10 and 11. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling, for he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. So I know I was protected by angels, especially that night, Wednesday night. So I just want to, give God all the glory and thank him that I'm still here. But, and as long as we're here, we need to continue to serve him no matter how hard the trials are. There was a saying, I forgot, I was going to write it down, but there was a saying I seen the other day. You can use an umbrella in the rain, but it's not going to keep it from raining. But you can have faith in your life. It's not going to stop the trials, but it will help you to get through the trials. In other words, the umbrella stops the rain from getting you wet, but faith will help you through the trials no matter what. So I like that saying. So okay, well, yeah, so thanks a lot again for praying and all that you've done with prayers and monetary assistance and everything you've all done. So, all right, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here this evening, to see you all here. was asked to give this story. And, well, I just grew up here like everybody else did, right? Yes. So I sit down and think about this story, what I was going to say and what I wasn't going to say. And I came across this verse in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 10 says, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am." And there's more to that verse. But tonight, as I talk about, think about, reflect back over my life, and I will try to stay in front of the mic again. And I'll tell you why later, why sometimes I move around. But it's by the grace of God that I'm here tonight. There's several times I could be dead in my life. About 4 times as I go through this story. You never really think about it till you're asked to do this, and it's real. What started out on November 4, 1976 is when I was born. About 1:40 in the morning. They went to the hospital, and Harold Reif, of course, Alan, was in there, and Jenny was born first. She's a matter of hours older than me, okay? So she was born first, and then Mom had me just hours after midnight. Jenny was right before. Harold's birthday was the 4th. I hit Harold's birthday, not Jenny. But anyway, growing up, it was Jenny and Kenny, the little cousins, okay? So Jenny and Kenny, we ran around together, family gatherings. That's just what we did. Anyway, we lived where Philip and Donna lived, there in Cheesetown, right there. My dad worked at Wayne Feed. So I was born, life went on, and Dad decided it was time to milk cows. The Dice farm down there, where Dean is now, came available. They bought the farm. In 1979, we moved to the farm. That's all what they tell me, okay? So we're there at the farm, August 2, 1978. Dale was born, my little brother. Dale lived 2 years. My family was together Friday night. We were just discussing this. I said, I don't mind telling my story. But I said, I know I'll cry. It's life. The corn harvest that year was pretty good. We had picked corn that day, the day before, whenever. We had rented the bins. Grandpa Lehman, okay, let me back up to my name first. When we went to the hospital, the year right before I was born, there was another neighbor boy born. Mom and Dad wanted to use Dennis Lee, okay? Dennis Lee got used by Harold Breckbill. They named their boy Dennis Lee, so that name went off the books. Then it was going to be Kenneth Lee. That didn't sound right. So on the way to the hospital, it was decided I was going to be Merle Kenneth or Kenneth Merle. So when they came, I was born. Of course, we didn't know gender at that time till you were born. Before I was born, if I was a girl, I was going to be Ruth Neoma. That's my grandma Ocker's name, my grandma Amos. Okay, Ruth Neoma. But in certain words, there was never going to be a Clyde Aaron. That was not going to happen, okay? I was not going to be Clyde Aaron. So, I was named Merle Kenneth, and they wrote that on the papers, and Dad said we're going to call him Ken or Kenny, whatever. I get called all kinds of stuff, but anyway. So, Merle Kenneth is what it was. Dale comes on the scene. That morning, they had rented the corn cribs in there where Jim's Country Market is. Now, this is real to me. I was gonna be 4, this was in October. I would have been 4 in November. So I was 3, almost 4 when this all happened. Dad hooked the truck up to the wagon that morning. He come in to the house to tell Mom where we were going. Dale and I were on the swings. I can picture it just like yesterday. I said, Dale, let's go with Daddy. We went out, we got in the truck. Mom brought Dale a coat out. It was a little bit chilly. Brought that coat out, put on him. I already had a coat on. We got in the truck, we went in there, the Jim's Country Market, where the corn crib was. Grandpa's little Bluey Ford tractor, Fordson, whatever it was, little Bluey we called it, was hooked up to the elevator. And we unloaded corn. The wagon got empty. Dad told me, I can still remember this, stay away from that PTO shaft. We were picking up ears of corn that missed that wagon, that missed the elevator. We were there, picking up them ears, throwing them on that elevator. Dale bent over to pick that one ear up, and there was a bolt in there that shouldn't have been, that caught his little blue coat right here. Just took him around a ring. When he hit the first time around, most likely he hit the ground. This might sound gross, but the top of his head popped off. Skull, off it went. There wasn't cell phones, there wasn't no help. We were there. Dad picked him up, unhooked that wagon, picked Dale up, laid him on the floor of the truck, took his coat off, covered Dale up. Dale was done going, but so be it at that point. Put me on the seat. Of course, there wasn't car seats back in those days, and off to the hospital we went. We were only 2 blocks away. After that, things really turned fuzzy, hazy in my mind, besides one more point. We went through them hospital doors, running. They took Dad and Dale, and they were gone. He was a little 3-year-old boy. The nurses, and this is so real, them nurses took me in that waiting room, the nurses station, and they had a white cup of lollipops, dum-dums. Here, have a lollipop. Here, have another one. I sat in there and I ate lollipops, just like yesterday. By that time, they'd called Grandma Lehman. She went down, she got Mom, she come in. Alan Flegel showed up. Miriam Strite was in nursing school, and her shift just got over. She showed up there at the wait in the hospital. Dale was gone. The funeral, the viewing, I remember just slight parts of the viewing. The funeral and the grave, burying him out here. You can ask my brothers and sisters, they can tell you more about that than I can. That's all blank to me. I remember people coming to the house, the food pouring in, and people being around there, but that's all hazy, fuzzy. Dale was gone. It's one of my first memories. There down on the farm. One of my next memories was something I did myself that's one of the times, that could have been me wrapped around that PTO shaft, but it was Dale. One of the next memories that I did, it didn't really make any sense, but I did it anyway. Some of you have been down there on the farm and have went sledding down that hill. Well, that particular year, I turned 6 in November, so I had to wait till I was almost 7 to go to school. That was the year it was, when I was 6. That winter, it was a real cold winter, and we had about an inch or two or whatever, half-inch ice on top of the snow. Went up that hill. The day before, we were out sledding with the neighbor children there at the end of the lane, and their daughter and me were about the same age, and we were sledding together, and for whatever reason, we got a notion to lay flat on our back and look up at the sky and go down the hill. Don't make a lot of sense, but we did it. Don't ever try it, please. Well, I went up that hill, and I don't even remember how far I went up. We had a well out there, and there was a telephone pole out there beside that well. I come down that hill on a plastic sled on ice. I was laying flat on my back, head first down the hill, looking straight up, not paying any attention to which way I was going. I went head first into that pole. Could have snapped my neck just like that. But by the grace of God, I'm still here. Steve was there close by when it happened. Mom and my sisters were carrying firewood. Dad was milking. I tried to walk to the house. I took about 3 steps and fell over, throwing up, couldn't stand up. But I tried. Steve went and got Mom. They took me to the house, carried me. Probably had a concussion. She called the doctor. The doctor said, just keep a look at his eyes, see if his pupils are dilated. Some of you may remember this, but I had black eyes. My eyes went shut. That particular evening, it was January, is when it was. It was Grandpa Lehman's birthday. And we were supposed to go down there for supper, birthday cake or something, so we went. Of course, I wasn't feeling too good. I was laying there on the couch down at Grandma's. They didn't know if I was with it or not with it. I was just there. Grandpa and Dad were discussing how many heifers were at a certain farm. Dad couldn't remember. I answered the question. Whatever it was. Oh, yeah, there's this many there. Because I was always with Dad when we fed them. And we counted them. Anyway, as soon as I said that, everybody was breathing better. At least his mind works. At least his mind works. They tell me later that one morning I got up and come down and said, Mom, I can see light, I can see light. I asked several of them if I was totally blind, if they fed me, if they helped me get a bath, go to the bathroom, whatever. Nobody seems to know that. I don't know. That's blank. Just a point. Nobody seemed to have an answer, but my eyes were black and blue and swelled shut from that bang on top of the head. A couple years later, I was up in the haymow. It was early morning in the dewy lawn outside, and I'd walked across the wet lawn. Our barn was set up a little different than some other people's barns. The hay mows were a little different shaped or whatever. Anyway, we were up there, and I was up on the mow at the moment, and when we got done usually up in the mow stacking hay, we used the elevator like a little sliding board to get down to the bottom of the barn floor again. We did that, and I went to get on the elevator that morning with wet shoes, and you know what wet shoes and metal happens. My feet slipped, and down I went. Landed on that barn floor. That was about a 20-foot drop or something, I don't know, something like that. Hit that barn floor. I remember at that point we didn't go into the hospital for x-rays or nothing. They thought I was all right. We had a wagon there with rubber tires on or whatever, little play wagon. We call it the big wagon. They brought that big wagon up in the barn and they hauled me to the house that time. stiff and sore for a few days, but no broken bones. It was still pretty good, but again, could have been killed. We had the silos there behind the barn. We never had silo unloaders. We were the silo unloaders. We went up and forked silage out of them things. One day I went up there. Again, it was wet. Went to grab for that last step and missed, and down I went. 25 or 30 feet down that silo chute, landed on that time I landed flat on my feet. At that time, Dad did decide that maybe I better go into the hospital and get x-rayed. So they did. Got all the x-rays done, came back, everything was clear. The doctor was sure I had would have problems with my heels. He figured crushed heels or my hips. Be something the matter with them from falling that far, landing. Again, stiff and sore, but I got over that. And even nowadays, if I make the wrong move or whatever, I can feel it in my back. Maybe it has something to do with that. I don't know. There was another time up at the Coe Valley camp. Out there, we used to go swimming up there. Some of them, I'm not that big of a water fan, and after this happened, I'm still not a water fan, but I almost drowned in that pool one time. When I jumped in there, and I shouldn't have. Almost drowned. If it wouldn't have been for the help of Nate Kempthorne, I believe his name was. He grabbed a hold of me and pulled me out of there. I'd have drowned in that pool. So in my early life, before I was a teenager, I did bump and bang myself around pretty good. It's not near that bad anymore. Seems like them things don't happen as bad. At the age of 14, I gave my heart to the Lord down at the Brea meetings, and I can still remember that night. Brother Don Stelfox and I sat on that one cabin down there after the invitation was given. And I tell people that's probably one of the reasons I like to move around when I talk. You know, Don Stelfox, he never stood still. He was on this side or that side or wherever. But I've always appreciated Brother Don. In May of '91 is when I was baptized there at Strasburg. Ellis Martin would have baptized me, and Paul J. brought the message. And Tim and I were baptized the same night. That was Clayton, Wadle, and Crystal and Kirsten, I believe, were the 5 of us in that class. You remember that? Anyway, there was 5 of us in that class were baptized that night. As time went on, growing up, I always talked about, watched people lead singing. I always wanted to be a singer man, okay? We didn't have a pitch pipe, but I'd go out to the shop, found a nice big washer. That worked pretty good. I often wore bib overalls just like that. It fit in that pocket just pretty good. Put that old washer to my mouth, man, I was bun, leading singing. I thought back over the years, we learned to beat some time and do some leading singing over here. But one man who was really influential in my life in leading singing, he's not with us anymore, but he would have sat right here many a days. Elmer Weaver. My last year of Bible school when I was 15, we had class right there. Elmer taught the intermediate boys right there, and Anna Mary taught the girls. I think it was in the basement. Elmer Weaver wanted to sing that song that was in the book, Church of God, Thou Spotless Virgin. And he handed his pitch pipe around to different one of us boys and helped us lead that song right there in that ante room. I found out later, the night we got baptized, that Elmer was disappointed he had responsibility here. He couldn't come there. He made an impression on me, and I made an impression on him. Elmer wanted us to know that year he wanted us to know the books of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation before 8-10 weeks of Bible school was over. There were several of us that could do it, did Genesis to Revelations. Yeah, have a dear appreciation for dear Brother Elmer. So by the time I was turning 15, I was joining the youth group activities. I turned 16 there in 92. I got my driver's license. By May of 93, I'd completed 10 grades of school. Steve was there with my dad on the farm, and I was getting to the age that I needed something to do, so Steve went and got a job, and I quit school after 10 grades to help Dad there on the farm. So I was there helping him on the farm, and that particular year is when one of the chicken houses there on Kiefer Road burnt. So of course we had cleanup, and there was a lot of you all involved in that, helped clean that chicken house up and rebuild. I tell people I did not graduate from school with a diploma, but I spent a lot of time in that chicken house doing piecework. I learned more about building cages and building houses and building chicken houses and listening to my uncles and Harry and Lee and them guys building that chicken house. No, I wasn't sitting over here doing XY squared, but I knew what a tape measure and a saw and hammer and nails was. I learned a lot that year. And if you ever get involved in building chicken cages, there's a lot of piecework. I learned a lot to stick at it. 180 feet or whatever that chicken house is long looked like a long way down there, and it was going slow. The only thing to do was to stick at it. Soon after that, my brother Dean was getting a little older. He was able to help Dad some there on the farm, besides going to school here. So I took a part-time job helping Bill Barkman milk cows out here on the other side of Letterkenny. I'd go over there and help him once a day, milk cows. So between being passed around between the neighbors, my uncles and Dad and Bill, I was busy, always into something. By the time I was almost 20. It was in September that there was a job opening in at Chambersburg Farm Service. So I quit doing milkings, and I went in there and worked in there at Chambersburg Farm Service for a while. All this time, there was cousins and friends and everybody else getting married, and everybody kept rubbing it on me. When are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? I don't know. Whatever. I didn't make a whole lot over it. One time I was in there at the Farm Service. There's another near-death experience. We were in there, and we were supposed to be working on a mix wagon, a night mixer. We were putting metal in it because it was wore out. We had to replace a bunch of metal on it. We had to do a bunch of welding. I wasn't much of a welder, but the fellow that I worked with, he could weld really well. I said, well, I'll help you put these metal pieces in there if you do the welding, because I'm not going to. So there was 2 shops in there. Over in the other shop, they had a MIG welder, and we thought that would work better than that old stick welder we were trying to use. So we went over, got the MIG welder, plugged it in into the socket on the wall, and we put that MIG welder in there, and he was welding away. We welded and worked on that mixer all day long. 5 o'clock that evening, we went home. We were done. I don't know if we were done, but we went home. It was the end of the day. We went home. And I don't know all the details behind what all took place next, but for whatever reason, Nathan Wadle went back into that shop to do something. He opened the door, and he turned the electric on or whatever, and he went in there to do something, and that welder was sitting right here, and the chain hoist was right here, and he took the chain hoist and he just swung that chain hoist out of the road. And when that chain hit the side of that welder, the sparks flew and it blew the main breaker. It just fried that chain. That chain was welded tight. You couldn't hardly even move it. Come to find out later that there was, the plug on the wall was wrong. Our plug on the welder fit in, so we didn't worry about it. We just plugged it in. I don't understand electric that much, but that thing was supposed to have 4 prongs on it, so it had a neutral and 3 hots. Somebody put it on a 3-prong plug, so there was 3 hot wires and no neutral. So the outside of that welder had current in the outside. When that chain hoist hit it, it was a straight ground, and that's what blew that breaker. Now, we welded with that thing all day long, grounded it to that mixer. We're still here today. I don't know where the other guy is. I lost track of him. But in reality, him and I should have been electrocuted. That's just the way it was. Needless to say, somebody came in the next morning and replaced that plug. That plug was never left like that again. But anyway, again, that's just one of those bad things that happen in our lives. Well, anyway, back to being still there at Farm Service. There was a fella running the truck, service truck quite a bit. Him and some of them in there didn't get along real well, and they ended up telling him to go home one day. And after that, they said, all right, Ken, it's your turn to be on the truck. You've got to take this truck now. What that meant was out on the road doing service work. All right. So I got sent out here, I got sent out there, I was here, there, and everywhere, but again, back earlier in my life, when I was just a young little guy, I would have hid behind my dad. I was shy, and I'm still shy. That just wasn't me to be out there on the front line like that, but that's the way they wanted it, so they put me out there. And it started to help me develop into relating to people a lot better. Earlier in my life, if you would have seen me out, I'd have just either put my head down or I would have ignored you. That's just the way it was. If I would have saw you at Walmart, I'd have went the other way. I wouldn't have talked to you. But I think my dad, they tell me that's the way my dad was, so I'm not blaming it on him, but that's an Ocker gene I have, okay? So that I had to work through that in life, but I got out a lot more and meeting the public, and I was learning to talk with people and to work with people. And one particular morning, I was told that I was to come down here to Wagner Road, right out here, to Lawrence Groves. He had a tractor that wouldn't start, so he needed some help. I come down to Lawrence Groves, and some of you know Lawrence. He's can be a bit of a character, lively guy, likes to talk. And him and I got to talking about this or about that. And he looked at me and he goes, "Are you married?" I said, "Nope." He goes, "You're not?" I said, "Nope." He said, "When you getting married?" "I don't know." I said, "I don't even have a girlfriend." He looked me straight in the eyes and he goes, "I'm going to tell you something, boy." I said, "What?" He said, "I want you to know, Bob Whitmer over here has 2 daughters. Why don't you just get over there?" I said, "You think?" He said, "Yeah, I think you should." Oh, okay. Well, I can't say that I hadn't noticed my wife by that time, but I hadn't done anything about it. And it's still, that was earlier, it's still, I don't know, it was a year or so later. It was about that long till I decided it was time to consider getting married. But I told him later, I said, Lawrence, I took your advice one day. So yeah, that's how we met, or that's how we got together. My wife actually ran around with my sister Joanne some, so I knew who she was. I knew she was around, but just really hadn't talked a whole lot to anybody. Just the way it was. Again, I was shy and just rather just stay to myself. So we got married in March 4 of 2000. Everything took place. Got married. We got married right here in this church. So that all happened during the year 2000. About 2002, I was still in there at Farm Service, and they told us that they just filed bankrupt. They said the next little while things are going to be hairy, scary around here. Everything had to be done on a cash basis. Things weren't looking up. So now it was decision time. Just married. Skylar was actually born in 2001. This was 2002, so I had a wife and a young son, young little boy at home. Do you stick it out, hope things get better, or do you move on? So I decided it was time to move on. Called up Bill Barkman again and said, hey, Bill, said, you looking for any help? And he said, yep, whenever. So I went back over there to Mr. Barkman full-time. Did herdsman work over there for a while. Worked there for another 2 years. Soon after that, my dad and brother Dean decided they were going to get a little bigger milking cows, and they were moving the herd from the home farm over to the Dice farm there post Nathan Waddell's house. They moved the herd over there. They wanted to expand. That all was fine and good, except my dad started having some health problems. That Meniere's disease, his ears. He couldn't keep the level liquid in his head balanced. And when it would get out of balance, he would go dizzy, and he couldn't walk from here to them benches without falling over. So here Dean was expecting my dad to be able to help him, and all of a sudden Dad's doctoring, trying to get this Meniere's disease straightened out, getting his balance back. He was losing his balance so much. Dean come to me in 2004, and he said, Ken, would you come help us milk cows? I said, well, I guess. I don't know. We talked it over. I said, if I'm going to work for Bill and milk, I may as well milk for you guys. What's the difference, really? It's family. So in 2004, I left the Barkman farm and went over, worked with Dad and Dean for a while. 2006. Dad's health was a lot better. He was able to get back into the barn. Dean got married about that time, so Denise was around there. And milk price wasn't that great at that time. And we didn't have enough of cows really to support 3 families. So it looked like the best move was for one of us to get a job again off the farm. So at that point, I left the farm again. And I went to Byers Tire in 2007. 2007, I started running their alignment machine. I think Brian Flegel was contemplating going to Fresh Start about that time. He didn't go till a little bit later, but there was an opening there. He went on the route to the service truck a lot more. He went out on the road, and Brad and I and Darren Flegel, I don't know who all was there. Some of them other Hearst boys were there too when I started. But anyway, I started there, and I worked there till 2011. But in that time, between 2007 2011, of course, we were there at Strasburg, grew up there at Strasburg the whole time. 2008, it was decided to buy the Newburgh Church. So they put the plea out in 2008 that the members at Strasburg, you had 3 options. Yes, I'm going to Newburgh. No, I'm not going to Newburgh. Or willing if asked. So each of us heads of home had to fill that paper out and hand it back into the ministers. and they were going to decide what we were going to do, how that was going to be. Of course, I lived up there in Quinn Bridge Road. Newburgh was down here a little ways. Wasn't quite sure what to do. I wasn't going to say yes. I wasn't going to say no, so that left one option. I'll go if you want me to. Or I shouldn't say I. We'll go if you want me to. So we left it at that. We checked the box. We'll go, willing to go if needed, and handed it in. So when they read the list of names off the people that were going to Newburgh, my name was given. Our names were given, so we started attending Newburgh. In fact, yeah, I would have led the first song at the Newburgh first service down there. So we started church back there. Things continued on in life. It was about that time Bob and Sharon were raising Cheyenne. Things were getting a little out of hand there with her. They needed a little help. They were getting older. Cheyenne was getting older and trying to think what to do. And it was about the winter of 2008 or 9, somewhere in there. We moved down here to Panola Mulch there at Rodney's house. From up there, we moved down here. Skylar was in school. It was a lot closer for school, for my wife to take him to school. I still worked up at Byers Tire at the time. I said, I can go myself. That's not a big deal. So I worked up there, and we moved here. We were closer to Bob and Sharon. We were going to help them with their work and all that stuff. So that all worked out. In the January of 2011, I got a call from, at that time, it was Agri-Service. They had bought Whitmer Implement out, and they wanted to know if I wanted to come work for them. I said, what do you want me to do? To drive truck. So, all right. So we sit down and talked there, and they wanted to pay me about $3 less an hour than what I was making. And I said, well, unless you're willing to come up here, I'm not coming down here. I said, that's just tough. So we parted ways. The last comment they made to me was, anybody can drive truck. We don't have to pay you if we don't want to. I said, then find somebody else. 2011 Labor Day, my phone rings. I look at it, it says Agri-Service. I pick it up. And I said, yeah, what do you need? He goes, what do you have to come? We can't find a driver that's worthwhile. I said, oops. He said, will you please come work for us? I said, are you going to pay me what I wanted? Anyway, we worked that all out, and I went to drive truck for Agri-Service, delivery truck, throwing barrels and stuff around, moving barrels, all that kind of stuff. And I enjoyed my time there. About 2013, they said, it's about time that you start doing sales. Sales? That means I got to talk to people, and I got to open up. So I started, in 13, I started with the 3 routes that I had. I was doing delivery, sales, both at the time. Later, they turned it into 8 routes, 8 days on sales and 8 days of delivery. That made a month's work. And now it's 16 days of sales now. I don't do much delivering unless I have to, but once in a while I do. Not very often. But I've learned a lot over that time. Learning how to relate to people. Working with people. I've been told to get off a farm before. Some farms I'm the best, some farms I'm the worst. It's just the way it is. So I've been doing this full-time sales since about 2017. But back up a few years, in 2011, I'll back up a couple more years before that yet, and then wrap this up here shortly. When I was about 17 or 18, 19 years old, 20, right in there somewhere, Barb had gotten married, so she was in Georgia with Conard's family. She was down there. Joanne was teaching school down here at Muddy Creek. and Joyce was in McConnellsburg teaching school. So that left Mom and 4 boys and Dad at home. And like usual, 4 growing boys like to eat. Mom had a lot of cooking to do. If Mom was here tonight, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but if Mom was here tonight, she'd be sitting right over there smiling. There was always a lot of dishes to do. You can ask my dad, you can ask my sisters. When supper got over, Mom and I did the dishes. I dried many dishes. I could never figure out why it took so many tablespoons to make a meal, but I don't know. I still don't know that reason. And if I didn't know where something went, I certainly didn't put it away because I didn't want something not made because I hid a dish. And that didn't matter to Mom. All Mom cared that them dishes were dry. She could pile me up anyway. And we stood there around that kitchen sink and we would discuss the day's events. We would discuss church. We would discuss whatever. Time her and I spent together. She washed and I dried. Set them on the counter. She'd have me piled up. What I knew where it went, I just put away as I was working, but she would pile me up, and then she'd just go put the dishes away till I caught up, and then she'd pile me up again. It didn't matter to me. We were having fun, and she enjoyed it, because she told me that later. We talked about that. But in 2011, the end of the year there, of course, being with the Whitmer family, and most of you remember all this, but Marcy passed away, 2011. Got that dreaded call at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was. Christmas was on Sunday. Marcy was there Saturday night. The Whitmer family was together there up at Bob's place right over here. And we had a good time together. Marcy wished everybody a Merry Christmas and said she wasn't feeling good and she went home. Normally, that wasn't really, she didn't really talk like that a whole lot around us, but that year she did. On Christmas Day, she called and told Bob that she wasn't feeling good, and Bob said, well, you want to come to our house? So Bob went and picked her up, brought her over here to the house. And he said, do you want me to take you to the emergency room? And she said, no, I'll be okay. Well, Monday, December 26th, being Christmas was on Sunday, everything was closed the 26th for Christmas. Monday morning, they took her to the walk-in. They got her to the walk-in. They checked for her pulse and blood pressure, and they couldn't get a blood pressure. They said, to the hospital and now. Got her to the hospital, put her right in ICU, and there she was. They messed around most of the day with her in there Monday, and couldn't really figure out what was going on. My wife and I were youth advisors at that time, and we were going to have a youth volleyball game that evening. So we had Cheyenne with us, and we went to Solomon's out there where they play volleyball, and we were playing volleyball. And Bob had called and asked if my wife would stay in at the hospital with Marcy over Monday night. We could probably do that. They could go home. Bob and Sharon could come home. I was going to take my wife in there. So that all was going to happen. And about 9:30, 10 o'clock, they called and they said, no, they said Sharon was just going to stay in there. So we could go to bed. We were supposed to go to bed and get a good night's sleep. And I said, listen, if anything happens, you call. About 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone rings and said, Ken, yeah? If you want to see Marcy alive, you better get here now. Well, we had Cheyenne, Skylar, Kiana, and Logan, all three. We just couldn't leave the house. I said, Bob, did you call the boys? He said, no. I said, you let me do that. We called the boys, got a hold of Rodney, got a hold of Lynn, told him what was going on. Rodney said, "Are you going to the hospital?" I said, "We can't." He said, you could hear him on the phone. He said, "Laurie, do you have to work tomorrow?" She said, "No." She said, "You get down there to Ken and Minnie's right now." She come in there. She pulled in the driveway. She jumped out, was in our house. I mean, it was a matter of minutes. She was there. My wife and I jumped in our minivan and we headed for the hospital. We got up here about Culberson's church, school, before we got to the red light. Rodney went through that red light. He was moving on in his pickup. It was middle of the night. The light was still red. I never stopped. There wasn't nobody coming. We were going. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but between 80 and 90, I was going up past Culberson Mennonite Church, up 997. I couldn't catch Rodney. I don't know what he was doing, but he was going. We pulled in the hospital. We got in there. Rodney was going in the emergency room doors just as we pulled in. We parked and we got there. We ran in there, got there to the emergency room doors, and Rodney's standing there just shaking his head. And I thought he meant they wouldn't let us in. He looked at us and he goes, "She's gone. She's gone." We didn't make it. They left us go back to the room where she was. She was laying there on the bed. She just looked like she was sleeping. There she was. We went through all that to get that all figured out, get the funeral stuff figured out. They had to do an autopsy. And they found some drugs, they found some marijuana, they found a little this and a little that, but really to say what she died from is hard to say. They said her sugar, diabetics, was way high and they couldn't bring it down. The doctors had asked her if she drank antifreeze. Baldwin Sheridan said the doctor would go in and look at her, come out and just shake his head, get on the internet trying to figure out what to do with her during the day. They knew they were struggling. Some of the Newburgh ministry were there. I remember Leroy Yeager was there, Dan Mass was there, a couple different ones. But anyway, they were there. But anyway, on the 31st of December is when we buried her out here, 2011. So then life moved on. Marcy was gone. Cheyenne went down to camp in Fairplay down there in South Carolina. Come home, she got married. All that stuff took place. But in 2020, as Tim was talking about being in the hospital, that last week of June of 2020 is when my mom was real low. July 5 is when Mom passed away, 2020. But if you stop and think about the dates, it was this morning. Sunday morning, July 5. First Sunday in June. Today. 3 years ago. Mom lay the week before. Mom lay low the Sunday before, the last Sunday of June. We didn't think she was going to pull through that day. We were called there as a family. We stood around her bed. We sang. We talked. And we sang that song, "What a Day That'll Be." Every time we sing that song, it's light. We changed the words, "No more cancer over there." We still talk about that song as a family. Of course, that was over COVID. We had a small funeral. It was probably one of the first funerals after COVID. Because Nelson Ocker passed away in March, and there was no funeral. Sort of had a little burial thing out here. By July, we were able to open up a little bit. The person there, hospice was there and all that. And by the end of that week, we were saying they don't know. Mom hadn't ate or drank for all week, hardly. Just laying there. She couldn't talk. She was just there. Basically in a coma. They said that particular Saturday night, July 4th, they said, the hospice said to us, they were talking to Barb, she was up, and they said, Barb, if your mom wanted, if there was one last wish for your mom, and they said, what would that be? She said, peace and quiet. The hospice lady looked at us and she said, tonight's fireworks. She said, I don't know how you all believe or whatever, but why don't you all just disperse and go watch fireworks tonight? Let Mom alone. That's what we did. We went down here to Shippensburg, Chambersburg was canceled, whatever, rain, whatever. Down here, watched fireworks. We went to bed. Got the call 2 o'clock in the morning. Mom was gone. Mom's gone. About a year later, we got the call. It was in the last week of June, a year later in 21, we got the call that Wayne Dean went to sleep and wouldn't wake up. Joyce had called the ambulance. He was headed to Carlisle. My wife and I, of course, Mom wasn't around. You know, you depend on Mom. Mom wasn't there. My wife and I jumped in the car, got in the vehicle. We met up with Joyce at Carlisle. We stayed with her throughout that time, throughout that week. We were sitting there in Carlisle. The doctor came in and he said, we can't do anything for this man. We're going to life flight him to Hershey. All right. We sat there a while. They finally got him prepared to go, prepped, got him all prepped, brought him out. And that, if you're ever at Carlisle Hospital, the doors are over there, and the helicopter was sitting over there. And we were standing right here, and they come right out to walk, and they stopped, and they said, you want to have your last time with your brother-in-law, husband, whatever. Wow. Things didn't look up too good. They put him on that helicopter. By that time, Melvin and his dad, Janet, showed up. They were there, so it was my wife and I and them two and Joyce. Joyce got in with them. They left for Hershey, and her and I followed them. Got to Hershey. They took us up, I believe it was room level number 4 up there somewhere, nice little ways up the hospital. We were in the waiting room, and of course, again, COVID was still pretty real, and you weren't supposed to be in there. The doctor said, he came in and he told us, he said that Wayne's shunt had come apart right here in his neck. He had a shunt in earlier in his life, and it was not draining. His brain was covered in liquid, and there was pressure on the head, and that's what put him to sleep. He said, we have one option. We're going to drill a hole in his head, and when the pressure goes, he'll probably come back too. Let's do it. This was in the middle of the night, getting later. Arlen and Rachel had showed up by that time. They were there with us. They took him to the operating room. They drilled that hole, and unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to say it, there was no pressure. That doctor didn't have words. I don't know what to say. So we were there milling around. It was 4 o'clock Monday morning. We were there still milling around in the waiting room, deciding what we were going to do, and they had a change of nurses, and that head nurse came out, and she said, this is not a place you can stay. You must go. Yes. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. What are we going to do? She said, anywhere but here. Well, we knew we were supposed to be back down there at 8 o'clock that next morning to meet with the doctors again. So this is 4 o'clock in the morning. We were supposed to be back at 8. till we drove home, till we drove back. It really wasn't worth it. My wife and I crawled in the car. We tried to sleep. That wasn't too good. Didn't work too good. Anyway, long story short, 6 o'clock came. I said, I'm going in here to get some coffee. I said, it's Starbucks in there in Hershey. I got inside that door to get some coffee. And, what are you doing in here? I said, I'm going back here to get some coffee. You're not to be in here. You go on. Whoa. I said, well, I just want to go get some coffee. I said, I'm going back out. The lady at the desk, she looked around a little bit. I haven't seen anybody. Just go. So I went back here. I got us both a cup of coffee. Long story short, they did the MRI and they found that little spot on his brain where the tumor was that was putting pressure in there. And that doctor, they had given up hope. We were preparing a funeral in our minds. We thought Wayne's time was done. The right doctor looked at that MRI and he said, if I go in there and snip that little piece, it'll take the pressure off and Wayne should be better. The rest of the story is Wayne's still alive and well. It worked. But in the process of all that, one more quick story yet. One more quick story here. In the process of all that particular week I was off the truck. I was on the sales route. Another guy was running the truck and he said, your truck has noise in it. I said, okay. I knew it did before I was off, but we had it scheduled to go to the garage. It didn't make it. The date was later. He said it has a noise in it. So July 4th, 21 came around again. We were closed on a Monday because it was Sunday this year. July 4th, July 5, we were closed. July 6th, I crawled back in that truck, headed for Perry County. Was up there, got about half the route done, jumped on 322 and was headed across 322 from Newport to Millerstown. And this truck started making a crazy noise, a loud whining noise. I'm going about 65, 70 mile an hour, and all of a sudden I hear bang. I mean, it was a loud bang. And something, I had my lunchbox between the two seats. When that bang went, something smacked that floorboard that high, that hard, that my lunchbox jumped up here beside me, turned upside down, sit back down. But what in the world was that noise? I got to get this truck off the road. So I'm going about 70 mile an hour. And the old drive line's down there's just a whipping and a banging and clanging and beating on anything because it's still flying around. I push the brake pedal and the brake pedal goes right to the floor. No brakes. Uh-oh. Now what am I going to do? I took that gear shift and I slammed her into park. Didn't do a thing. It wasn't even hooked up. It unhooked. Man, it's going into park. I slammed that thing into park, and I'm still going to stay on down the road. I thought, let me think up here just a little bit. I can get off the exit, and the exit was up a hill. I thought, man, I hope this thing, I start up that hill, it stops, and I don't know what I'm going to do. All of a sudden, the good Lord laid on my mind, grab your emergency brake. I grabbed that emergency brake, started pulling that brake up, and that truck started to slow down. I drifted her off the side of the road. Jumped out of that truck and looked. There was a coupler in there that when Ford built them transit vans, if you ever have a transit, watch it, there was a rubber coupler in there that shouldn't have been in there. It should have been metal. And that rubber coupler let loose and broke away from the transmission. So that drive line was in there just going like this. And when it was in there going like this, it took the brake lines and took them down with it. And that's why I lost all my brakes. It totally destroyed underneath that truck. They were going to total the thing, but they didn't. They fixed it up. With COVID and parts, all that, it was 6-7 months till I got that truck back. I'm still running that truck today, but every time I go through Millerstown, I think about that. Right here's where this truck. If you ever ran a transit or you ever fill a transit up with gas, the gas is right under the driver's seat. The drive line's right there. If that would have hit that gas tank, I wouldn't be here. The sparks would have been flying. Yeah. Anyway. That wasn't a good day when that happened. No days are like that. So I tell you that part of my story. That brings me pretty much up to where I'm at today. Life has moved on. Changes come, changes go. In September 21, Dad and Cherie got married. We had another adjustment. Nothing wrong with that. Dad asked me to be the best man in his wedding. How's that? I can say a lot of people can't say. Best man in my dad's wedding. My wife was matron of honor. It was a good experience, good time. We knew that without Mom and Dad, then his hearing wasn't going to go so well. With his hearing, he can't quite hear quite right all the time, but he needed a helpmeet. And Sheree answered the call, and it worked out. So we've enjoyed having her in our lives since. She takes good care of him, so that works out great. So yeah, other than that, I don't think I had too much more to say here. It's about time to close anyway. So life continues on, and I can thank my parents. I can thank my dad especially. Mom's probably up in heaven. If she's looking down, she's probably smiling. But I can thank my dad for everything he's taught me, being willing to help out where needed. And, it's my prayer that I can pass that on to my boys. And I didn't know if I was going to say this tonight, but I am going to say this, that if for whatever reason my wife and I go away, a lot of times we still do dishes. I still do dishes quite a bit. Together we do the dishes quite a bit. But if we're not there, the boys will pick up and do the dishes. And it's not because we went out the door and said, no, you do the dishes. We might even tell them, just let them sit, we'll do them when we come back. But it's not unheard of. It's scholars doing dishes. Believe it or not. We try to pass those kind of traits along. He's helped out quite a bit. Kiana's helped out. Logan's helped out. Hunter's helped out a few times. He's been there too, so whatever. But yeah, it's time to quit here. But as I was thinking back over my life and thinking about this story, maybe I don't have much of a story, but when I stop and think about how many times I looked death in the face, but I'm still here. And it's my responsibility to keep on doing what I'm doing till God calls me home. Thank you.
Zach, if you can just lead us when we close out the service with 652, those two verses, and you can just lead it from there as we close out the service. There's coming a day. Thank you, Brother Tim and Brother Ken, for sharing with us tonight. And I would just want to close by the verses that actually was, in the same chapter of Romans that Curtis actually opened up our service this morning with, in Romans chapter 8. I want to read 3 verses prior to what he read. Romans 8:26 says, "Likewise the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God." And then verse 28 is the verse that we all know, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. I don't know what goes through your mind when you sit through an evening of hearing a brother or two share their experiences and their story. It's not their story, it's actually God's story, and God's working his story out in the lives of each and every one of us tonight. And it's inspiring, it's encouraging, and it actually helps us, I believe, bless each other and appreciate each other. That's why we encourage testimonies like this. Oftentimes we just see each other through opinions or lifestyles or differences, and we tend to maybe not appreciate each other as fully as it is whenever we hear somebody actually share the lenses that they're looking through and the experiences that have shaped their lives. Austin Smucker and his wife Sherilyn's in the area right now, and they stopped in at our house last evening. They wanted to be here this morning, but it didn't work out. And they were sharing their story there as captives in Haiti. And he was just sharing one detail I'll say quickly here, and we'll close. He said, they had different personalities and different experiences there within that kidnapping. But he said, we go to church together. We see each other on Sunday. We see each other on Wednesday. And we can kind of work out our differences, or if we hold a grudge, it's easier to hold a grudge towards one another or not forgive another because we're not with each other all the time. But he said when you're in a confined area like that, and there's disagreements and there's differences and there's different opinions on how to work it out. He just mentioned about how beautiful it was for them, as there was a story within inside the story that they unveiled to us last night that was really interesting to me. But he talked about how they couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't avoid each other, they couldn't get away from each other, and they worked those differences out. And I just say that to say, as Ken shares tonight and as Tim shared his experience tonight, it gives us different perspective if we don't share that. And so I think God wants all of us to share his story through our lives, be willing to share that with our neighbor tomorrow, be willing to share that with a lost friend or even our children, sharing that. I think there is benefit and value to letting the redeemed of the Lord say so, letting others know how God has brought us through. It is the experiences that shape us to reflect God's glory, God's story in us. The songwriter says, tell what God has done for you. Oh, tell what he's done for you, because others may need him too. And ultimately, to Tim and Ken's point here tonight, it's not to lift them up, but it's to lift up the Lord Jesus. And that's what we want to do with our story, how God is working through us. So God bless you for coming. Is there anybody that has any comments or questions or thoughts before we close out? All right, then what we're going to do is we're going to stand for prayer, and we're going to ask Brother Adrian if you would close us out with the closing prayer, and then we'll sing There Is Coming a Day, 2 verses. God bless you for coming. Let's stand.
That reminder, the rest of the week, we remember to walk